Good morning. I almost forgot that I was supposed to be up here. I had to run, so I'm a little out of breath. So for the first 5 minutes, I may be huffing and puffing, so just bear with me with that, all right? We started a new series a few weeks ago called Confidence That Comes Through Character. And so we've been in the book of Philippians, and so if you have your Bibles, you can turn there, and we'll be in the first chapter, kind of moving through some things. But we talked about character. We talked about some important things about character, and one of the important things that we discussed about character is that character is built over time, right? So character is not inherited. We are not born with character. We are born in the image of God, which means we have some things instilled in us that are naturally good, but most of us are naturally evil as well. We have the curse of sin, and so we have this sort of mix of things, but character is not something that we're born with. Character is something that gets instilled in our lives over a long period of time, and it gets instilled in our lives in more than one particular way. So character can be built in our lives when times are good. God can build character in our lives through his blessings of us. Because in that we see that God is good, that God has the capacity to bless us, that he gives us things and gives us an opportunity to steward the good gifts that he's given us and to glorify him with it. And so even through good times and through good things, we have the opportunity to have character, the right kind of character, built inside of us. But I would say that there's the times where character gets built in a unique way happen when things aren't going so well. As I reflect on my life and where I feel like I saw God move me sort of forward the most or instill kind of a specific kind of level of character in me, it's normally when things aren't going as I would have desired for them to go, right? I wouldn't have voted for those kind of seasons, right? But there's sort of this times two multiplier, right, of character when things aren't going well for us. Meaning when things are just kind of, they're hard and they're tough and we're going through seasons that are difficult, God is doing something in us. God has the opportunity to build a certain level of character in us. And we're going to look in the book of Philippians today, and we're going to see Paul reference something. And Steve talked about it a little bit last week as well, but we're going to see Paul reference something really, really briefly, right? He just sort of glosses over it almost. But for us, we need to sort of stop and pick this little passage apart because there are some serious implications for you and I. There's some serious opportunities of growth for you and I. So if you have your Bibles, we're in Philippians 4. And here's sort of the question that we're going to pose today and hopefully answer. Or here's the problem that we're going to sort of unveil and hopefully look at the life of Paul and maybe get some answers for. And here's the question we have to ask ourselves. What do we do when a group of people, what do we do when people oppose us? What do we do when people seem like they're literally trying to make our lives more difficult? What do we do when people literally are trying to build obstacles in front of us? What do we do when people personally, like they are opposing everything we are as a person? What do we do when this happens? And this happens to all of us in some sense, right? If you've lived a normal life, you've had people oppose you, right? And sometimes it takes the form of family, that there are some family members in our lives who seem like they are opposed to everything that we're about. That who we are, what we value, what we believe, they are opposed to that, and they make that opposition very clear. And sometimes it works itself out in really, really toxic ways, right? Where they almost kind of poison the family against us. They make accusations against who we are. And it feels like that there are people in our lives, close people, family, who literally are there. They seem to make our lives more and more difficult. Holidays are coming up, right? So we may have the chance to experience that, really soon. Or it could take the place of a coworker, right? You've probably had coworkers who seem like it's their job to annoy you, right? It's like in their job description somewhere in fine print. It's like annoy the mess out of Josh, right? It's somewhere in there. Or they just literally want to make you look bad, right? We've had bosses who don't like us for whatever reason. We don't know why. We've got neighbors, like the neighbor who we know they're the ones turning us into the HOA, right? We know it's them. We can't prove it, but we know it's them, right? I've had like 5 of those neighbors. But we'll all have people in our lives who seem to literally just oppose us. Like that's what they're put on earth to do. And maybe it's not even that personal. Like maybe it doesn't come in the form of a person-to-person relationship. Like we live in a world in which like your views, your beliefs, like what you hold dear, who you desire to be, what you want to be, those things can be criticized and opposed from anonymous people, from people that you never see or groups that you never see. And we still have to sort of wrestle with and deal with the questions like, what do we do when we are opposed? What do we do when we are criticized? What do we do when accusations are made or levied against us? Because we live in a world, again, the anonymous world, it's very easy to generalize. It's very easy to demonize. It's very easy to just sort of lump you in a box and say, because you hold to this, this is who you are. And it's hard to not hear those voices. It's hard it's hard to deal with the actual human being in your life who opposes you. And it's really easy to simply react in the way that the other people are reacting you to. It's easy to just return what they give you. That's the easy thing to do, and that's the very natural thing to do. In fact, to not do that almost feels like we're coming from a place of weakness. That if we don't meet that person, if we don't meet that opposition with the same kind of force and with the same kind of attitude, it's almost like we're a weak person. And so these are the challenges that are in front of us. And Paul's going to unpack that, and he's going to reveal to us what really amounts to a different way. And it's going to come from a different kind of character, and it's going to reveal sort of the kind of character that actually lends itself to confidence, to being okay with opposition, and to be okay with criticism. And so we see this really, really briefly in Philippians 1, verses 15. And here's what it says. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. So again, Paul really quickly here just kind of glosses over the fact that there are people who are opposing him and his work and really who he is as a person. And we see this throughout the New Testament. This is not a new thing. This is not the only place where this happens in Paul's life. Paul is opposed very much aggressively in lots of different ways from lots of different people groups. I mean, Paul he plants churches. These congregations were formed and started, literally all over what was the known world, right? So from Jerusalem to what is now Turkey to Eastern Europe. All of these places, Paul visited, established congregations, Paul did all of these amazing things. And if you look at the New Testament, you find that all along the way, in all of these stops, Paul is having to sort of backtrack and address opposition and criticism that comes. So there are some groups that call out Paul and say, you know what, Paul's not that great. So after Paul's established these places, people come in behind him and are like, Paul's not that great. He's not really worthy to be trusted. His credentials, they're not that good. He's not someone that you should really be taking this kind of advice from. He's not the person that you should really be listening to. There was even a group who literally, they made it their life's work to follow Paul around and visit the places where he established congregations to convince those people that actually what Paul was telling you isn't true. That actually to be saved, to achieve salvation, you actually need to revert back and follow the Jewish law. These people launched missions from Jerusalem to all these different places across the sea where Paul would establish these congregations. First of all, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that someone literally making it a part of their life's work? Like it's their job to oppose everything that you're doing. Can you even imagine a scenario like that where that would somehow be possible? The only person that I would do that to is the person who would come knocking door to door and my kids are napping, right? That's the one person that I would follow them around, right? And be like, you're going to my neighbor? Okay, I'm going with you. Don't sell from this guy, right? But can you imagine that? Can you imagine someone opposing you so much that it's like, you know what? I'm going to make it literally a part of my life to follow you around and undo what you want to do. And see, for you and I, when we experience opposition or we experience criticism, man, it bothers us. And it doesn't have to be very big. It bothers us. That one sort of sarcastic sentence or one sort of barb at us, that could literally ruin our week. We can stew over that. And Paul could he could list out for you different groups and hundreds of people who were directly opposed to who he was and what he was doing. And so as Paul begins to talk about this, he talks about it as if it's sort of just like a very small blip on his radar. It doesn't even matter that much. And it's going to point to the kind of character that God had built inside of him. The kind of character that was ready for this kind of thing. And it leads him to speak out of a confidence that when I read it, I don't understand how he's saying what he's saying. But Paul's saying this because of this deep, deep work that he had invited God into, that he had asked God to do inside of him. And so here's the first reality for us. The first reality for us is that life is going to test the character that you build. That's what life is. Life is a test of the character that you are going to build, or that you're going to invite someone else, preferably God, to build inside of you. And one of those tests is going to be opposition and criticism. That's going to be a test for you. I've heard it said, and I think it's true, that if you want to see sort of the true nature of someone or the true character of someone, be witness to when they are criticized openly or openly disagreed with. Catch that moment in time, right? And you're going to see what kind of character someone has, right? Or in essence, when someone gets squeezed, right, in a really, really uncomfortable way, the character that's inside of them is inevitably going to come out. There's a book that George Orwell wrote called The Road to Wigan Pier. It's a really boring book. You don't have to read it. But I read it because I was really interested. I liked 1984, and so I picked it up and started reading it. And it's essentially about a book about how terrible life was in England post-World War I, right? And that's literally all the book's about. So if you want to be bored and depressed, go read that book. But there was one part of the book that really caught my attention, and it was interesting to me. He describes he's in Great Britain post-World War I, and he's describing the atmosphere and kind of what's taking place there. And he's in Yorkshire. And he's in Yorkshire when Hitler reoccupies the Rhineland, right? So the Rhineland, if you remember from history class, was the demilitarized zone from the Treaty of Versailles that was signed after World War I. It was kind of a reparation for Germany to lose that section of land, and that it was to be not to be militarized. It was a buffer zone. So Orwell describes that he's in Yorkshire when Hitler reoccupies that land, takes over. And he describes this sort of the atmosphere of fascism is on the rise, right? War is sort of it's the sort of the signals of war are sounding. He's in Yorkshire. He says, the news of this breaks, no one says anything, does anything, no one blinks, no one cares. It's like nothing even happened. He said he's there 2 days later. 2 days later, the London or the Great Britain Football Association announces that they are no longer going to be publicly announcing the game schedules in advance, right? And we know why they publish game schedules in advance, right, guys? Yeah, you can just say it. Yeah, because we want to bet on it. We want to gamble on those things, right? And so he said this happens 2 days later after Hitler reoccupies the Rhineland, and he said the riots in the streets were unbelievable, right? And so for Orwell, he was looking at it and he's like, okay, what does this say about who we are as a nation? That was his question. that war is on the doorstep. These ideas and these things that are really, really dangerous, they're going to lead us into a conflict. They're on the rise and they're moving and we don't care. But someone takes away our ability to gamble ahead of time and the world seems to end. See, for Orwell, like that was a marker of character. That was a marker of character for him. He thought that this was a reflection of the character of the people. And he's like, and this isn't good. And see, for you and I mean, the same is true. Like when we experience opposition, when we experience criticism, like what we really care about, like what's really inside of us is going to begin to show itself. Look, and it's important for us to realize that like we are going to be opposed. Like that's what's going to occur. And the question for you and I is what kind of character is God building in us that we might respond to that? A pastor who I really respect and admire said this, and he said this on Twitter, which is outrageous that he would say this on Twitter. But here's what he said, and he believes it. He says, if someone is criticizing you, and the criticism is mostly mistaken, identify the 10% of the indictment that is fair and be willing to hear it. I thought, that's a crazy statement, right? It really is a crazy statement to hear criticism from someone that you maybe don't even know, right? Or doesn't really know you. Because that's what we're really good at. When someone criticizes us or opposes us, we are like, it's an instantaneous thing that happens where we can bring out an encyclopedia of reasons as to why they're wrong, right? Ask my wife. This is what happens, right? You criticize me, I can give you 40 reasons why you're wrong immediately, right? Or we respond in the same way that we're responded to. Or we just kind of say, well, you don't really know who I am, and I don't need to listen to you. But for someone to say that when someone criticizes you, like listen to what they're saying, even if they don't know you, even if it's mostly wrong, and identify the 10% of it that might be true, it might be fair, it might be worth you taking to heart. You know what that speaks to? It speaks to a high level of confidence. And not confidence that you're so great, but just the confidence that you know what, I can take this criticism and through the character that God has built in me, I can use it for something that this person did not intend to. I found this quote and it's in your outline, from David Powelson, who writes in the Journal of Biblical Counseling. And I thought this quote was great, particularly the end. And he says, whether a critic's manner is gracious or malicious, whether the timing is good or bad, whether the intention is constructive or destructive, whether the content is accurate, half-true, or utterly false, in any case, the very experience of being criticized reveals you. To what madnesses are you prone? I love that part. And you can Google that author and that article and read it. It's really, really good. But to what madnesses are you prone? Because what these individuals are basically saying is that for us, criticism ultimately becomes a gift, not a curse. And so for someone who actually desires for their opposition towards you and their criticism of you to be a curse unto you, if God has built the right character inside of you, then from that character comes confidence. And with that confidence, you are able to use the criticism and opposition for something that is good and not evil. You're able to take something that they meant for evil and actually use it for your own good. To ask yourself, okay, well, is this a fair reflection? Or is a portion of this a fair reflection of me? That I actually use this and actually make myself a little bit better. That I can hear it and actually see myself a little bit more clearly. See, we're only able to do that if God has built a particular kind of character in us. Because with that character will come a particular kind of confidence. And so our character will be tested by these things. And so Paul reveals, he talks about the criticism, he talks about the opposition, he talks about what God is doing, and then he reveals exactly why he is so confident. He reveals this, and he does this in verse 19. He says, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ that has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. And I eagerly expect and hope that in no way will be ashamed, but I will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this means fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and I will continue all of you for your progress and the joy and the faith, so that through my being with you again and your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me. So again, Paul here, he unpacks one of the more famous passages in the Bible, right? If there's a tattoo verse, right? This is the high percentage is going to fall under these few verses. But Paul unpacks why he is so confident and why he's able to hear the criticism and just say, you know what? They're criticizing me, they're personally attacking me, but they're preaching Christ. So then so what? But he begins to unpack sort of how he's seeing God work in his life and who he sees God to be and why his character is so confident. He comes to this place that actually brings him to a place where he's actually to say, you know what? Like, I don't know what is better in life. I don't know if it's better for me to die or to live. That Christ had done such a work in his life, had built such character in who he was, that he arrived at this place where he's able to say, like, I literally don't know which would be better for me. Because if I die, I get Jesus. And if I live, then I'm still at a place where I'm able to do what he's called me to do what he's made me to do, to carry forward the mission that he's put in my heart and in my soul. I'm able to do that. And so I don't really know which one is better. That points to just a crazy amount of confidence, right? And again, not confidence in who he was, but confident in what God was doing in him. You see, Paul had attached his confidence to the right things. It had to do with what God was desiring to accomplish through his life. That Paul had to invite that into his life. Paul had to ask for God to shape and build his character. And from that, we get the outcome of this way that Paul looks at life. Because he built his character on the right thing. And that's the really, really important part for you and I. Because we're going to have competing things that are asking us, that are going to be inviting us to build our character upon. And so the point for us is that, like, when you attach your character to the wrong thing, you won't be able to withstand opposition. You won't be able to withstand accusations. You won't be able to respond to criticism in the right way. If your character is built on other things, and that's the challenge of life, because life is going to offer you a lot of things and tell you that, you know what, character really looks like this. And so when we attach our character really to us, to our hearts, to our desires, to the things that we want, if we were to attach our character to the ideal that I just want to be accepted by people, I want to be liked by people. And so all of my character is going to be built on achieving that goal. Well, then when accusations come and criticism comes and opposition comes and it comes loudly, your character crumbles because it's literally the thing that you were trying to build your character onto. And when it doesn't work out, there will be no character and there will be no confidence. If we try to build our character on our own sort of personal level of success, be it power, be it fame, be it wealth, be it whatever it is, if we build our character on the wrong thing, it's not going to withstand the temptation. It's not going to withstand the opposition. It's not going to withstand the criticism. We've built it wrong. I can remember very, very distinctly sort of the hardest class in undergrad that I ever took. And it was hard because the professor, one, was a jerk, right? So that's reason number one, it was so terrible. but also it was just a really, really hard class. But he's one of those guys who, like, again, he's the I'm going to make your life miserable and I'm going to enjoy doing it kind of guy, like one of those. He's one of those guys, right? And I remember taking a test, and I have a very my brain works a certain way, and I'm good at test taking. It drives my wife crazy, but I can think, and if you give me a multiple choice test, like I can sort of work this system and study in such a way where I can kind of eliminate and not really study all that much, right? So it's sort of a maximum amount of sort of like, let's get as far as we can by doing as little as possible. That was kind of my approach in school. And so I could do that really well on a multiple choice test, right? And so we go into a big test, and I'd studied in this fashion, and I was led to believe that this is the kind of test I would be taking. And we get down, and he sits down, and he begins to pass out the test. And the test is just, it's blank sheets of paper, right? No multiple choice, it's blank sheets of paper. And he says, okay, we're going to write an essay. I'm going to write 4 questions on the board. I want you to write an essay on. It's like, okay, alarm bells are now going off in my brain because this is bad. I'm a terrible essay writer, right? I don't know if you noticed, I'm a pretty bottom line kind of person, right? So if you're a bottom line kind of person, essay writing is not going to be your thing, right? Good essays require like junk and fluff and all that stuff, right? I'm not a good essay writer. And so I was mad. Because I was led to believe that this test was going to be multiple choice. And he's like, well, you can refer to your syllabus. There's things in there that say I can change the test whenever I want to. And I was like, so I went and looked, and I kid you not, it's like the rest of the syllabus is like 14-point font. Somewhere in the middle of the syllabus, 8-point font, it says, I can change the test at any point in time I want. Literally says that. So again, it's like he's this guy. But anyways, I didn't do well, right? Didn't do well on that. Because again, not an essay writer. But the truth is that it was my fault. Like, that's my fault. Because I had structured, literally, my whole basis of success was on my ability to do a multiple choice test and to figure out which concepts were a possibility and which ones weren't a possibility. And so for you and I, like, there's going to be a lot of chances for us to build our lives in a way that when things change or when things get difficult or when things aren't as what we thought they would be, that it all just sort of begins to fall apart. It all begins to fall apart. And so Paul's call to us and his ask to us is that, look, like, if you invite God into your life, like, God is going to give you a mission. And it's going to produce in you this sort of this level of confidence. And it's not a level of confidence that's about you. It's not a level of confidence that's about who you are or what you're good at or what you're able to do. It's a confidence that comes from who God is and the work that he's done inside of you. And it's that kind of character that isn't broken. It's that kind of character that gives you actually a greater sense of purpose. Because once you begin to see God for who he is, you begin to see that God can do things in my life that I cannot do. God can show me things that I'm not going to find on my own. God is going to take me places that I myself could never go. That God is going to do things in my life that are far and beyond ever what I thought was possible for me. See, the more you see God for who he is, the more you begin to have this realization that I can't do this part on my own. And that when things get hard, when things get bad, in fact, the character that I would prefer to build, the things that I would prefer to achieve, that character is going to crumble. And I'm not going to have any kind of confidence. I'm going to wonder, why did my life turn out so poorly? Why is my life not going the direction that I want? And this is literally the opposite of what Paul is saying. Paul is saying that I have a mission, that God has put me on this earth to do something, and to do something through him, and something that is significant. That my life has an amazing amount of purpose and meaning in it. And when I invite God to build that kind of character in me, the kind of character that's built on the things that he wants to build it on, that I'm going to have the confidence to deal with whatever comes. Whatever that comes. And again, the key to this was Paul knowing God for who he was. Look, and you want to talk about like what the Bible is? The Bible as a whole is this revealing of God, his character and nature and who he is. That is the Bible in a nutshell. And we see this all over the place in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, where God is trying to articulate very clearly who he is. And because he's articulating who he is, it's going to begin to shape our lives in such a way that we are responding to who God is, and it's building in us this kind of character, and we get to respond to life with confidence. He does this in a lot of different places. But one of the places that I thought was a fantastic place is Exodus 34. This is one of the very first times that the people of Israel actually get to get a sense of who this God actually is. All right, they've been delivered out of Egypt. They've seen God do these amazing signs and wonders, but what God is doing is still somewhat of a mystery. And this is the very first place where God actually, to this group of people, to Moses, actually articulates, this is who I am. He says it in Exodus 34, 5 through 6. It says, the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name, and that name means reputation, proclaimed the reputation of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And so steadfast love kind of becomes the hallmarker of who he communicates himself to be, that I am a steadfast, loving God. He uses that word 21 times in the first 5 books of the Bible. That is his sort of marker of who he is. And that word has a lot of depth and a lot of meaning to it. It's literally tied to the very nature and character of God, that God is steadfast and in love. And it has this idea that no matter what the opposition is, even if the opposition comes from you, because that's normally where the opposition is coming from in this regard, that God's love, his main opposition is not some outside force, it's actually inside of us. And so God, this word actually communicates that God's steadfast love carries beyond even the opposition that you would put up in front of him. This is who God is. This is God revealing himself and actually showing himself to his people and giving them what they need to achieve what he's going to invite them to do. And what he's going to invite them to do is be a part of the mission that actually redeems the world. That's what his invitation was. And his invitation was through his character, that you can do this because I, your God, I am steadfast, that I will steadfastly carry you through the things that you don't think that you can walk through. And this is where our confidence comes from. This is where Paul's confidence comes from. And so part of God's character, this is the point for us, part of God's character is steadfastness because God himself is unchangeable. Look, and that in itself is the source of what we become confident in. That God is going to invite us to something greater than we can do on our own. And God's actually going to, through his steadfastness, carry us through that. And it's going to be good because he's going to be able to see the future, and he's going to be able to actually walk us through the things that we don't think we can walk through. He's going to be able to walk us through the opposition and the criticism that we might experience. Through the pandemic season, when we were kind of in lockdown, I got into buying single stocks, right? Because the stock market was like, just going haywire. And so I thought that would be a good idea. Sort of, right? Turns out buying single stocks is much more difficult than buying, regular stocks. And I found myself multiple times in the situation where I'm like, you know what? If I could just see like a week into the future, like this would be so much of an easier decision. And my wife's like, well, duh, like everyone would say that, right? That's true for everyone. If we could just see the future, yes, stock buying would be really, really easy, right? When to buy and when to sell. It wouldn't be that hard, but it is. And it's hard because we can't see into the future, not even a little bit. And I found myself I was kicking myself watching these things play out, right? And so I'm like, I'm out, not doing this anymore. So, but the truth is that God knows the future. And God is steadfast throughout all of time. Like time is not a concept that God finds himself inside. God is steadfast and unchanging and outside of time. And we gain confidence like when I know that I have the opportunity to know and see the creator of the world who's made me for a purpose and knows my future. Like I can invite that God, knowing that God's desire for me is to build a certain kind of character, to do things in my life. I can invite him to do those things when I know God knows what's ahead. And I'm able to face criticism and look at criticism and opposition very differently because I'm walking with the God who knows what is ahead. And so part of the character building is the fact that we don't know the future. Part of character building is having to embrace God and embracing his steadfastness and his steadfast love and having that sort of carry us through times that are hard and that are difficult. Look, and none of that's easy to do. But the main thing that Paul is telling us here is like, look, if you invite God into your life to build a certain kind of character, it's going to allow you to build a kind of confidence that withstands pretty much everything. You will look at life radically different than the world around you. You will be able to make statements eventually, one day, hopefully. I would like to think that I would be able to make this statement, but sometimes it's not true. Some days it is. To make statements to say that, you know what? Like whatever God wants to do with me in the next 2 weeks, I'm cool with. That wherever that goes, wherever that takes me, whatever my future holds, like I'm in. That kind of confidence only comes when I'm constantly inviting God to build a kind of character in me and to reveal himself to me so that I know who he is better. So the good news for us is that like when we attach ourselves to the right character, criticism, opposition becomes a blessing to you, not a curse. When we see God's character as something that builds us for something, builds us for purpose, man, that gives us a sense of identity. It gives us a sense of like, okay, God is doing something and I want to be a part of it. And that God isn't changing. He sees into the future. He sees into your future. He knows exactly where he's taking you. That's good news for us. Let's pray. Father, as we prepare our hearts for communion, Lord, we're thankful for the cross because it's through the cross that we actually see the fullest part of your character and nature. We get to see you as clearly as we can see you. That the cross of Christ is the symbol, it is the manifestation, the representation of your steadfast love on our behalf. And so, Father, as we face difficult things, as we face people who personally oppose us, as we face criticism, let our confidence be in you. Let our character be built on what you desire to build inside of us. So that through that, God, we see very clearly what you're doing in our lives and where you're taking us, Father, and that nothing's gonna mess that up. Nothing's gonna derail that. That when we keep chasing you and we keep inviting you to build things in us, nothing's gonna derail what you're doing. Father, and you'll do things that are beyond even what we thought or could imagine. And that's good news for us. So, Father, as we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus, Lord, I pray that we would see your character on full display, God, and invite that character in our own hearts and lives.